and liberty even after. Common action should be taken to ensure economic and social progress of the EU member countries to avoid future conflicts caused by divergence in wealth and culture. In the following decades, the European Union proved to be a success model with great attraction. Personally, I regard it as very well deserved that the Nobel Prize for 2012 is awarded to the European Union. For more than 60 years, the Union, as the Nobel Committee emphasized, has advanced peace and reconciliation, democracy, and human rights in Europe. In several enlargement rounds, the number of sovereign member states uniting under the common European idea has grown from 6 to 27 up to date. The single market ensures free movement of goods, services, people, capital, and thus has contributed significantly to the economic growth and convergence in the European Union. In 1999, based on a political rather than economic decision, 11 EU member states introduced the euro as their common currency. The European Monetary Union again seemed to be highly attractive, as 6 further states have followed and introduced the euro as their currency. Some of them had only been admitted for political reasons, left aside that convergence processes had not even been successful. Ladies and gentlemen, the process of European integration has always been a political rather than an economic one. I think it is important to state and pronounce this fact, as I am convinced that we need stringent political decisions to move the EU forward again. Hardly more than a decade after the introduction of the euro, skepticism about the viability of the European Monetary Union has started growing. The European spirit politicians have conveyed in the economically successful years of the Union now seems to have dissolved. Politicians do not show too much enthusiasm to promote coherence in Europe, but instead concentrate on an apparently disoriented search for solutions in favor of vested interests. This behavior feeds uncertainty and fears. Ladies and gentlemen, the future of the European integration will depend on the very honest answer to the question which value the European Union has for us. What value do freedom and wealth have? What price are we willing to pay for the European idea? In my opinion, we need the willingness to admit Europe, but not at any price. We must not forget the original target, to create a unified Europe to benefit of all member states. In that respect, there's a comparability to the cooperative sector. How can this target be reached? We will have to solve the current problems by short-term crisis management. If you stand in a burning house, you might find it reasonable to extinguish the fire. You will most probably not spend your precious time on reflecting upon substantial fire prevention measures. This crisis management of the European Union appears in the form of the ECB sovereign bond purchases. Last month, the European Central Bank announced that it will buy bonds from countries demanding help from a European rescue facility. This step does not solve the euro crisis, but it has taken pressure from the financial markets and led to a short-term stabilization of the euro area. Nonetheless, a convincing and sustainable solution of the debt crisis requires first in place budgetary discipline and structural reforms in respective countries. The progress already made is obvious, but still time is a crucial factor. The market interventions of the European Central Bank, together with the implementation of the ESM, have bought us the necessary time to find and introduce long-term solutions for the European Union. We have to use this time to create a sustainable future framework for the European Union. It will be crucial to decide the direction of the integration process. Do we need Do we want to steer at a fiscal or political union, or do we prefer a core Europe with, let's say, a nucleus of 5 to 10 states loosely cooperating with a number of associated countries? Ladies and gentlemen, I cannot present you the solution of the problems of the European Union. That would be over-ambitious for 20 minutes. But I would like to shortly reflect two completely different directions, the further EU integration process. But none of them leads to an easy route, and each has got advantages and disadvantages. One possible way would be the implementation of a fiscal political union for 27 European states. That's my favorite. The other one would be the concentration on a core Europe of 5 to 10 states and loose cooperation, as said before. A fiscal and political union comprising a European transfer mechanism can only work when it is based on a common economic and political understanding. And most importantly, it has to be supported by the people living in the country. It would at least require highly harmonized, if not single, rules for public finance as well as a tax and social system. We see examples for a functioning transfer mechanism between countries. In Germany, we call it Länderfinanzausgleich. Although regularly criticized by the federal states, which have to take the burden, the German system proves that it can work if it is based on principle of budgetary discipline of each state. The model of a core Europe or a multi-speed Europe could also be seen as a possible way out of the crisis. Just in case a country left the European Union, it could use it as a chance to regain competitiveness by depreciating its currency. An increased competitiveness would grant a greater scope for structural and budgetary reforms, but that might not be the right solution. Good reasons speak for either of the, I have to admit it, extreme alternatives. Maybe the solution for you lays somewhere in between. Perhaps we waste our time on searching for the best approach and oversee the greater feasibility and pragmatism of the second best. Ladies and gentlemen, in my point of view, we definitely have to find a European approach. Without internal cohesion of the European Union, there is no external ability to act. Many politicians seem to overestimate the importance of their country in an international context. What economic role can Germany, France, Italy, or the United Kingdom play on a globalized markets if they stand alone? What will be their political weight in a global context compared, for example, to the US or to China? Just take into account the population aspect. In the EU, 27 counts about 500 million inhabitants compared to 310 in the US and 1.3 billion in China. Regarding such figures, how would you assess the future political importance of 80 million Germans, 60 million French, British or Italians? Or let's have a look at the economy. China and India together reach a GDP of 14,000 billion US dollars, already exceeding the European Monetary Union with a GDP of 11 billion US dollars, and nearly on the height of the United States and the European Union with 15 billion US dollars. These relations demonstrate the answer to globalization cannot be the retreat to national positions. The current crisis must not block our view on future challenges. If we now allow the growing fatigue for integration, we risk the international competitiveness of the European Union. Before the financial crisis started, the EU has agreed on the measure of Europe 2020. I don't know if you knew this, which contains a growth strategy for the coming decade. In my opinion, it would be an adequate means to overcome at least the economic effects of the crisis. The impetus of Europe 2020 is reflected by the following 5 major targets to be reached in 2020. First, employment. 75% of the 20 to 64 years old shall be employed. Second, research and development. 3% of the EU's GDP has to be invested in research and development. Climate and energy. Greenhouse gas emissions 20% lower in 1990. Education. Reducing school dropout rates below 10%. At least 40% of 30 to 40 years old completing third-level education. And fifth, poverty. At least 20 million fewer people in or at risk of poverty and social exclusions. These EU targets have to be transferred and adapted on a national level by each member state. So please allow me to refer to Germany, as I might have a better competence to speak about this country. At date, Germany does hardly fulfill any of the targets of the Europe 2020 paper. About 15% of the German population are threatened by poverty. You might not believe, but that's a fact, which leaves us in a medium position in the EU. Poverty can be fought most effectively by education, but in education, Germany's spending is rather the modest, one of the modest in the European Union. The European comparison reveals that there are only 4 countries with lower expenditure rates. That's Romania, the Czech, and Greece, and Slovakia. We do hardly reach 30% of third-level graduates compared to an EU average of 13.7%. So Germany is not the powerhouse as much or some of you might assume. Furthermore, we have a significant lack of graduates with so-called MINT degrees, that's mathematics, engineers, and natural science. However, we have good news from the labor market, which has demonstrated the effectiveness of the reforms implemented from 2003 to 2005. Untouched by the financial crisis, unemployment has considerably decreased since then. But even this positive news leads to one of the most challenging developments Germany will be confronted with in the nearer future. A shrinking and aging population causes a shrinking workforce. Referring to official forecasts, the reduction of the German workforce will be 15% until 2030. Thus, I do not describe a specific German phenomenon. Demography will hit many European countries. And what does this implicate? If we want to sustain, improve our economic position and our prosperity, we have to be highly innovative. We have to increase productivity. Briefly, we have to invest in people and in equipment. This is the point where banks, so I come to my topic. This is the point where banks come into the play. Banks are the intermediary between savings and investments. It is one of their main functions to lead capital to its most productive use. Banks serve the real economy by fulfilling their genuine intermediary functions: liquidity provision, transformation of maturities, and lot sizes, as well as risk management. Financial economy and real economy are 2 sides of the same coin. Ladies and gentlemen, stability, functionality, and efficiency of the banking system are preconditions for economic growth and welfare. Regulators must not, by any matter, withdraw the basis for a functioning banking system in the European Union. It seems to be a paradox that their attempt to improve the stability and resilience of the financial system appear to reveal the opposite effect. I have mentioned this morning, but I would like to say it again. We are facing a decade of regulatory changes with profound consequences for banking and banks. The separate regulatory approaches like Basel III, EBA stress test, international accounting standards, Solvency II, bank levy, consumer protection, Volcker rule, and so on, are highly complex and lead a parallel but uncoordinated existence. We already confronted with the consequences of this development. According to our DZ Bank economist assessment, the costs for regulation of German banks will amount to approximately 5 billion euros, only calculating Basel III, bank levy, and the reform of the deposit guarantee schemes. Besides these additional costs, the banking industry goes through massive job reductions. This development reaches dimensions that even newspapers title about the European bank job bloodbath. Moreover, regulation to an increasing intent determines business models of banks. To some extent, this might be reasonable, as the financial crisis has revealed. For the time being, regulators are at the edge of risking the existence of a core industry and the products and services it offers. This cannot remain without impact on the real economy. and it cannot remain without impact on economic growth and welfare. Just let me give you one very prominent example. Initialized by the financial crisis, an independent commission on banking, the ICB, elaborated a proposal on a structural reform of the British banking market. One recommendation of the ICB's final report, or the so-called Vickers report, maybe you know it better under this name, was to ring-fence retail and investment bank. It is a measure, as we already know from the Volcker rule in the US, where the former implementation of a universal banking system was regarded as one of the main drivers of the financial crisis. The results of the Vickers report have, to some extent, influenced the work of the so-named Liikanen report. This group of financial experts examined possible reforms of the structure of the EU's banking sector. I am convinced that any proposal to implement ring-fenced or separated banking systems leads in the wrong direction. So why? At first sight, the proposal seems to be convincing by its simplicity. We just have to separate necessary retail banking from the wholesale banking and thus prevent future financial crises. But the simplicity is misguiding. There are no simple solutions for complex problems. We just have to remember that in 2008 it has been the breakdown of Lehman Brothers, a clear investment bank and not a universal bank, that led to the near parallels of the interbank market. No Volcker rule and no Vickers report would have helped. It is also evident that the German economy, for example, during the financial crisis, has largely benefited from its well-diversified universal banking sector. Especially the cooperative banks have contributed to the stability of the financial markets. But cooperative banks would be extremely affected by the ring-fencing proposal of the ICB. It would shake the foundations of our business model, the division of central task at the DZ Bank or the WGZ, and more the local tasks on the cooperative primary sector. Ladies and gentlemen, I really do ask myself about the intentions of regulators. My doubts are enforced if I look at the blueprints for a European banking union. German cooperative banks, as well as their central organization, the BVR, reject the Commission's proposal. A banking union comprising a European banking supervision, also for small banks. A common mechanism for the restructuring of banks and a plan of the EU deposit guarantee scheme is not an adequate means to stabilize the euro against future crises. On the contrary, the approach bears a profound moral hazard problem, and I would promote risk-taking in the banking business. Shareholders and bank management in one country would benefit from the returns of risky business in other countries. We will not accept this form of distribution. The solid protection scheme of cooperative banks has been effectively safeguarding the deposits of our customers for nearly 80 years now, and I think it's comparable in the other countries in the EU. We do not see any convincing reasons to change the system. The Commission's plans for more integrated banking supervision would mean a profound reorganization and lead to more centralistic structures. That's poison for us in Germany. A single supervision mechanism that includes small and regional banks heavily violates the principle of subsidiary, one of the core principles of the European Union too. Thus, it should only refer to the big and systemically relevant banks in Europe. Anyway, a European banking supervision could only develop a stabilizing effect if it included financial hotspots like the City of London with its globally interconnected banks. Systemic risk do not stop at borders. Ladies and gentlemen, cooperative banks have largely contributed to the financial stability even during the financial crisis. This is not a personal perception, but also confirmed by third parties. For example, the rating agency Standard & Poor's upgraded the cooperative financial network and the Z Bank from A+ to AA-, and the outlook is stable. Well, given the recent regulatory and economic circumstances, this assessment is more than positive. Nevertheless, the cooperative financial network has potential for further development. So, for example, strategic leadership, a consistent risk management system, and the corporate customer business. So, Thus, we will, like any other bank, be challenged by increased pressure on margins and the need for further cost reductions. Ladies and gentlemen, the last years of banking business have been determined by exhausting debates on regulation and supervision. But we must not forget one fact. Banks are companies and enterprises that want and must generate profits. Nowadays, the word profit already seems to be fundamentally flawed. To my mind, profits are nothing reprehensible. The pursuit of profit is the main characteristic of a market economy and a distinguishing feature compared to a centrally planned economy. It is for the pursuit of profits that banking business adapts to the needs of its customers, to changing demands of the markets, briefly to competition. These are preconditions for future success for banks. The future of banking business requests resilient business models. We can identify the following 5 core theses for the success of banks in the 21st century. First, banks need customers. Cooperative banks in Germany count 30 million customers and 17 million members. The number of cooperative members significantly exceeds the number of shareholders of listed companies, which do not count more than 5 million. If you look at Europe, you will see 176 million customers place trust in their cooperative banks. It is by the soundness and stability of our business model that we attract so many people. Second, bank needs equity capital. The cooperative network reached 70 billion euros in June 2012. So the cooperative network in Germany is the bank with the highest level of capital of all banks. This illustrates a comfortable equity position in comparison to the financial industry. Third, banks need liquidity. Roughly 600